Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My guest today is Jason Richmond, who is the founder of Ideal Outcomes. Jason, how's it going today?
Oh, fantastic, Anthony, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to get the opportunity to speak with you this morning.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to learning more about what you're doing, what you've done, and how you can share with our listeners. So why don't you give us a quick, overview about your background and what keeps you busy on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. Well, my background, 20 plus years of my career has been in organizational development, learning and development, really focusing on individual skills and behaviors to impact performance of organizations. And that could be anywhere from small entrepreneurial startups all the way to Fortune 100 companies on a large organizational scale. And I've had the opportunity and been fortunate enough to really do that all over the globe, and live abroad in places and get the insight and perception and perspective of all different industries. And it's just been a fascinating career. And that's really what drove me to write my book, Culture Spark, is just all the best practices and everything I've learned from my career working with so many different organizations and so many different types of people and styles and tendencies. It's just been it's been a dream run, I got to tell you, Anthony.
That's awesome. Well, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. So it sounds like that's what you're up to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And anytime I have an opportunity to, work with individuals or small teams or even organizations to help them strategize or focus on the right key things in to help evolve culture, help evolve employee performance, help involve that strategic imbalance. I mean, that's what keeps me going every day.
So let's dive into that a little bit, because you and I know, as consultants, we know the outcome before people go through it, but all people see is like that starting point. So otherwise known as transformation. Tell me about not necessarily your process, but when you encounter people at the beginning of the process, what do you see versus what do you see at the end of the process, having worked with them? And we'll go from there.
And it almost never fails. You have a lot of different opinions and different perspectives at the very beginning. And from the very beginning of a process, when you focus on your organizational culture or your team's culture or those types of things, we start with defining it. And usually we work with, executives across an organization, and more than not, their perception of their existing culture varies quite a bit. And they're not necessarily always on the same page of what they really want their culture to be, right? They know what business metrics they got to hit. They know what their performance goals are. They know what their leadership competencies are. They all aligned in that, but they've never really taken the time and effort to really define the culture the organization needs to have. And that's the big difference from the beginning to the end. I would say the end, everyone's unaligned and singing out of the same songbook, if you will.
Why do people want to define that? As in, whether it's been in your own organizations, like the teams that you've led, or the external, what's the point of defining that culture, and what's the point of getting everybody on the same page?
I would say having everyone driving the same path. I mean, if you're managing and leading people, different groups, if the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing and why they're doing it that way, and there's no cross-departmental communications and alignment, you might eventually get to the same place, but you're going to have different people getting there in a different way. And your path is a lot more smoother and mechanically runs a lot better if the entire vehicle is going down the same path.
Yeah. So
and that's the big difference is the alignment piece.
Hmm. And so in your experience, what was a big aha moment, like in your leadership, whether that was running your own companies or like leading your own teams? What was an aha moment where you realized either that you didn't have that, or that like somebody who is mentoring you, like shared like, hey, this is the importance of this. And this is, how it worked. Give me a practical
Yeah.
example.
And this was very young in my career, Anthony. And I talk about this, I call it a defining moment. I talk about it an awful lot. I was really running and managing a sales team, and I was fairly new to the organization, and I inherited a sales team. And I would say for the first 4 quarters, we increased production and productivity and sales results by double digits continuously. And then after that, I kind of plateaued. I flattened out. The teams in front of me, we just kind of stayed the same. We didn't go down. We didn't start losing ground. We just kind of flattened out. And this went on for a couple quarters. So I leaned into, a business mentor of mine, and this gentleman still is, by the way. We're still very, very close, and he's still a business coach and a business mentor of mine. And I had him come into my whole organization. They interviewed every salesperson, every admin, other leaders in the organization. I mean, he spent talking to customers. He spent time doing ride-alongs with salespeople. He spent a good 3 days. And then I'll never forget that Thursday morning. He was sitting in my office, and he had a notepad full of notes from everyone. And he must have took about 6 minutes and just flipped through this notepad, and then finally kind of dropped it to the floor. And he says, "Jason," he goes, "nobody likes you." And it was something I will never forget. And he says, an organization, and I run into this problem. I work with a lot of organizations with that same leadership blind spot. They rely on leadership's performance to get them so far, and they're just pulling their people along instead of guiding and leading them to grow and prosper and empower them to actually take the organization where it needs. Departments and groups and things, if it's really all an individual leader's performance that's producing the results, there's only a certain level that performance is going to get to on an individual level. And it fundamentally shifted the way I led, the way I built teams, the way I coach. Totally shifted my leadership style from a micromanager to an empowering, developmental type mindset. And I got to say, it was one of the most defining moments in my professional career.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a smack in the face right there, right?
Yeah, that's it. And we all have them. Every leader out there, if they took the time to reflect, Anthony, has that defining moment that really made them the leader they are today.
What would you say? Because I think I heard a key word there is when they take the time to reflect. What happens when you encounter leaders who have no interest in reflecting or who do not want to listen to the notepad of notes? What do you do there? Can you coach uphill? Like, what's your experience there?
Yeah, I have. And there's times where, generally that resistance is a mental block, and that resistance sometimes is built on a lack of trust or an unknown credibility factor. So, coaching and working with an unwilling person at first will add time to the process and working with them. I mean, you got to take more time to build that relationship, that level of trust where they'll open up and share those defining moments or those learning points in their path. And they're not always negative, by the way. Sometimes, they can be both. But the answer is yes. And you can't get frustrated and you can't throw up your arms. You just have to really try to put yourself in that individual's shoes and see the world from their eyes, not your own. And that's a big fundamental difference in our culture model and what we try to do with organizations. We put ourselves in the individuals working in their shoes and try to see the organization from their perspective. not from our perspective, standing outside looking in.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, it's sort of a segue from that. You know, I get a lot of people that talk to me about like individual, like performance management and setting like performance metrics. But you also have people who are like marketing, HR, like project management. And then to add on to that, people who say they have like time constraints and load constraints. You know, what have you done? What have you seen that's been really successful in supporting that individual performance management without micromanaging? Unless you need to micromanage, in which case, go ahead.
I mean, there's, you know, of course, there's those incidences where, I mean, I'm not a big believer in micromanagement, but I guess one of the key areas that we focus on when we get in those situations is taking a look at their performance review process. We have seen a large fundamental shift in organizational thoughts about actual annual performance reviews, where, you know, old school, you get an annual review every year, you sit down, here's your scores, check the box, fill this out, give it to me, I'll put my comments on it. It in a lot of cases, it becomes a compliance type activity, right? And it's tied to pay raises and things like that. Well, we're seeing a shift in is that the performance review process is an ongoing weekly, biweekly, monthly, one-on-one conversation with people that always has a performance element to it. So I'm not sitting down with my manager and my manager telling me something that happened 6 months ago that I'm getting dinged for. Right. And it's more of instead of a review process, it's more of an ongoing coaching mentality, a development mentality. So at the end of the year, you have a series of records of the conversations, the development conversations you've had over a course of 12 months. And it's like, what else should we add to this? And let's talk about your goals for next year and your career goals and how you want to aspire and where you want to go and what interests you. And it's so much more of a collaborative process. I would say that's one of the major focus areas that we'll focus on in that situation.
Yeah. So like, I totally appreciate that coaching versus review model and the approach and like spending that time. I have personally a cross section of network from senior leaders who spend about 80% of their time leading and managing. And for them, their only job is to do those one-on-ones fundamentally. And then there's, you know, people on the more entrepreneurial side of things where a greater percentage of their time is spent doing the work and then trying to manage the doing of the work and the coaching. Would you apply the same approach to both cases, or is it sort of different depending on where you're at?
Personally, I'd apply the same approach to both cases. And even that entrepreneurial spirit, and I'll speak for myself and other entrepreneurials, you know, I've worked with. And I mean, at the beginning, the startup phase, that type of stuff, you're doing everything. I mean, you're rocking and rolling, you're doing whatever needs to be done. However, you rely heavily on the people around you also. And in my experience, the most successful startups, the most successful projects is when they're built on a collaborative effort from key people that you absolutely need to be successful. You know, and if you want to take it even farther, Anthony, as your company grows and expands and you add people and you're hiring, you know, a common mistake that we've seen over the years is people like to hire people like themselves. Right. And you get into individual cases where certain leaders or entrepreneurs want to be the smartest person in the room. And I really caution people not to do that. I mean, I challenge them to hire people a lot smarter and a lot more skill set in certain areas than they are. So then they're not consuming their whole times of doing it or fixing it or changing it, but they're focused on the business. They're focused on giving expectations. They're focused on support. They're focusing on removing roadblocks and letting these people that they brought in their team in a collaborative effort build success.
That makes sense. Yeah, I really, I see that like the well-balanced team kind of piece and the complementary skills piece, although it's, you know, I would imagine, easier managing oneself, but also hard at the same time.
Yep.
What's your experience been managing when you hire somebody who is opposite? And that's, the great part about culture is that it is diverse. Like, how do you
Yep.
find if a leader is put in a position where they have to lead somebody with a different, we'll call it value set, and potentially motivators? You did already mention to put yourself in their shoes, but what would you say to a leader like that who has to maybe lead up to somebody who has a different approach and different style of doing things?
Understand why. I mean, know the why. And when you communicate on project, on milestones, on goals, always in that communication have the why is this important and how does it really relate? How is it relevant to the ultimate purpose? And different people will get the same place or produce goals in different ways, and that's what you want within your organization. But they all have to align with the primary purpose, and don't ever forget the why. Why is this important? Why are we doing this? And if you keep that in your mindset, I think you could work collaboratively with everybody.
Yeah, I get that. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So let's shift gears a little bit. We've looked a lot like behind at the past. It's I see on your LinkedIn here, you're on the Forbes Business Council. You're obviously working with really good and then high level leaders. What are you seeing in the future of business, the future of technology? What's on your radar in terms of things that like excite you in terms of business in your community?
I think the level of employee empowerment is shifting. I think it's raising. I think that level of trust is important, but I think people are really coming to the table and saying, we have to keep our quality people. We have to retain our people. And we have to attract the best people we can absolutely attract to our organization. So this has to be a great place to work in order to do those two things. I think one of the biggest shifts, or one of the things I'm seeing in the future, is huge amounts of the population are working from home. And I think where we are in life now, we have realized that we can be productive and effective with remote workforces, which means my hire probably isn't going to be necessarily in the same town, right? So my pool of talent is hugely different, where I'm drawing from, but that also means retaining my high quality people becomes harder too. So creating the environment that people want to be in every day, the level of engagement they want, the level of empowerment, the level of importance they strive to have, has become more and more important.
Do you see a challenge with people who view work as, we'll call it like transactional, and said another way, some people who don't thrive in that online? Some people don't like working online, and some people don't like being self-managed.
That's right.
Do you just avoid those people altogether?
No. You got leaders and managers that have to, you have to know your team. You have to know who your team are. You have to know what each individual is motivated by. You don't lead everybody in your organization the same way. It's got to have a level of individualism to it. I'm not a believer that the world's going to work from home, right? There's always going to be people and companies and employees that come to the office, that come to the building, and that type of stuff. But I do think that we will see a higher level of remote workforce than we've ever seen before.
You got that. Well, I believe that especially with not just like the changes in human beings as ourselves, but the conditions around that we live in is going to, require that transformational leadership for people to actually be more attuned to that, which is everything that you've talked about here. Yep. What would be one of the things you would caution leaders and saying, hey, if you're a young leader, if you're, entering those, first, second year as whether a senior leader, middle manager, what's the biggest thing to avoid? What's the thing that messed you up? I mean, obviously we talked about the thing that people don't like you, but what's the thing you caution them as they move forward into that space?
I would say don't assume. Don't make assumptions about where your team is at. Don't make assumptions about where individuals, what they feel about their career and the work they're doing. And don't make the mistake of saying, oh, everything's great and everything's fine. Go to that extra effort to stay connected. Go to the extra effort to schedule that Zoom call or pick up that phone and maybe have a conversation just about other things, maybe a personal thing, ask about them, be engaged. Just don't make those assumptions, because those assumptions will come back and blindside you.
I mean, what they say when you assume, and I find it, I find it interesting, or like I'm trying to tie the corollary back to the individual performance management, because I think that's where a lot of people that I've seen, especially as it relates to strategy, look at like objectives and broad things versus actually getting down into the specific, because the specific is hard and actually keeps you accountable, but it also allows you as a leader to like that expectation gap, which is at the heart of the assumption. I assume you're doing something this way. You're assuming I want you to do it another way. And then we keep like growing further and further away as time goes on. And then that's when like the cracks start showing up in the culture, the teamwork, the performance, all that stuff. Anything you want to add on top of that?
No, I think you nailed it. And I think that's, that really drives, those touch points and on a regular basis, and the interest you take in your people is what's going to drive that level of engagement and that level of commitment.
Cool. That's awesome. Yep. Oh, I love that. I really get your passion for like humans, but without being like a soft human person. You know what I mean? Some people are really lovey, but you're just like, hey man, I'm here for you. And I want you to succeed because we need to succeed together. And I imagine that's sort of your approach, is just putting that out on the table, especially in your coaching. It's not like a performance review. It's, hey, let me help you win.
That's right. What's your role? What's my role? Let's make sure we understand what each other's role is to do and why it's important for our group, for our division, for our department to accomplish and get where we need to accomplish. So
in that past example, you used hour a lot.
Yep.
What have you seen in teams where it's my team, my department, my responsibilities? What have you seen that do for an organization, whether that's positive or negative? And then have you had an experience where you had to work on turning that around?
Yeah, you see compliance. You see the effort to do the minimal, do what's required. And then depending on, like in sales organizations and stuff, you might see false recordings of activity and things like that. If it's a me culture, you really are building a level of compliance and metrics, but not a level of commitment and passion for what I'm doing. So yes, I have worked with organizations in that situation, and we've done like engagement sessions with their whole team, and you've got to break down barriers of trust when that happens. When you enter a world of a me culture, people on the team, people in the department, and depending on how long it's been going on, feels, well, this is a flavor of the month. Okay, we've heard this before. We've done this before. So when you're really making that kind of shift, leaders really have to walk the walk, walk the talk, and demonstrate it. And their behaviors have to be, it's got to be an observable behavior change. Otherwise, team members, individual contributors are not going to buy into the effort. The one thing about culture, if it's in your own team, if it's in your business unit, if it's in your silo, if it's in your organization, it's not a light switch. It's not rolling out a new policy or procedure. It can't be addressed in a day, a week, or even a month. Right? It's a series of behavioral activities that are not adding time. It's just shifting the way you do things currently now to create the type of culture you want. And it's not something, we call it a culture journey for a reason. It's not a new policy and procedure. It's not something you can turn on and off. It's a strategy that needs to be implemented, and no one individual or one group can actually be responsible for it. The organization has to be on board.
Yeah. And what I hear about that, as you mentioned, like the flavor of the month piece, is that
Yep.
like as a leader, you have to outweight that. Like you have like the expectations of people, and they have to be like, oh wait, like they have to eventually see this is not going away. So I might as well get on board or get the hell out of here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. And it's not, and I think fundamentally what we're going through now and in today's world and our environment and, from economies to everything, I mean, there is ultimately some shift or some evolution of your existing culture. You cannot not believe that in certain situations, there's probably an element of fear of the unknown, right? Well, if you've got a team of 15 individual contributors in your group and you've got a little bit of a fear of the unknown going through your group and that type of thing, that's ultimately going to change, your culture a little bit. And you've got to be on top of that to be effective. You should be having conversations with your team about that, right? Because that's what they're living right now.
Yeah. And I've never thought of it that way, because if you have people who are like non-committal and really being complacent and doing that minimum, I could see how the non-committal and the fear, which is a byproduct of the lack of trust, like that's why it gets created.
Yes, exactly.
That's awesome.
Yep.
I mean, awesome that you can uncover it, because I find when you're going through that stuff, and it's why we have the podcast, is it sort of that you identify it. Like sometimes you don't even know what you're looking at. You just know what's happening, but you don't know why, and you can't diagnose it. And that's the great thing about having people like you, Jason, is you've been there, you've seen it, you know what you're looking for, because you can read a bunch of pages of notes and know the end of that.
Yeah. And you said diagnose. That's so critical. I think that's step 2 in our culture process, is really put forth the effort through the organization. It doesn't matter if you're a small company or a large company or in a single department. Take some time to really diagnose and get a true picture of what your culture really is. Because you can't evolve anything or change anything if you don't really know what you're working with.
Yeah, I'm with you. So as we finish up here, why don't you give us a quick summary of the book? Because obviously you're full of insights. You package it in your book. I want to hear about that, and then tell us how people can get a hold with you and connect.
Yeah, and my book was not based on me sitting down and writing down what I think are my thoughts. I took a year and a half and did nothing but travel the world and interview executives and leaders from all different industries to really bring all that knowledge and best practices together, and all the common threads and themes that develop a dynamic, high-performing culture. And we really developed a very simple 5-step process or a model to kind of follow. And we've talked about a couple of them: defining, diagnosing, planning, measuring, sustaining is the 5 steps. And the book really is loaded with, I would say, tools or resources that individual leaders can take and actually apply in their own teams and their own groups and their own companies, to start tackling any type of business challenge that has a culture flair to it. I'm a big believer. My team's a big believer. I'm not going to come into a company and fix your culture problem, right? I'm not an employee. I'm not an executive with your company. We want to work with key influential people with your organization on quarterly basis or bi-monthly basis and that type of stuff, and provide different tools and techniques and activities that these influencers can take into the organization and perform and implement, and watch the journey, lead the journey, lead the transformation, lead the change, if you will, right? But it really does have to come from within. So our approach is to provide what is needed, the roadmap, the tools, ideas, activities for them to get from point A, to point Z.
Yeah, you can show them, you can give them the map. You just can't walk. You can't push them down the road.
Yeah, I mean, and they've got to have that self accountability, and that's why from the beginning of our conversation, that's why we start with define. That's why there has to be a level of alignment and agreement that this is important, and that it is going to be a substantial step for us, a strategy for us.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Jason, I mentioned, like you got to be willing. Yeah. And if your team is willing, there's a way. But if you're unwilling, there's nothing anybody can do for you. And then you're going to have the same results. So what do you want? Do you want new results? Do you want the same results?
Yep, exactly.
That's for sure. Awesome. Jason, how can people get a hold of you, and how can they learn more about what you do?
Well, the book's on Amazon, Culture Spark. LinkedIn is Jason Richmond or Ideal Outcomes Inc. The website is www.idealoutcomesinc.com. All kinds of resources, blogs, thought leadership, online tools, culture resources, email, phone number, contact information there. But yeah, between LinkedIn and the website, I would encourage everyone to go check it out.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jason. Yep. Really appreciate the talk today. It's been awesome. And I'm really grateful we got to connect today.
Thanks, Anthony. Take care.
You too, buddy. My guest today has been Jason Richmond, who is the founder of Ideal Outcomes, Inc. So if you know somebody who isn't liked in their company or wants to transform their performance, their leadership, and really give that spark to the culture, of course, I had to use the book title, really be sure to send them this podcast, because any big transformation, any change has to start somewhere, but it doesn't need to be huge. It just needs to, follow a model like Jason's, really recognize that there is an opportunity for transformation, and then take that step towards leadership. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope you subscribe and like if you're watching this on YouTube, and be sure to join us for the next episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My name is Anthony Taylor. Thanks so much for joining us, and until next time.